It's that time of year when the world is filled with how to become a or kickstart your career videos. Some are fine, others are great, and some absolutely set us up for failure. In this video, I wanted to share my reflections on building a career in L&D, where I think some of these videos are going wrong, and what I would do if I was starting again today. To start this video, I probably need to make a little bit of a distinction. Getting a job, or a job title, is not what I'm talking about here. I'm not discussing what makes you more or less likely to secure X job or Y salary in Z amount of time. I'm talking somewhat specifically about becoming highly competent, a good or great instructional designer or L&D professional, whether that's the exact job title you end up with or not. I know instructional designer has very rarely been my job title, even when that is the job that I've been doing. This was observed quite recently actually in a social post that I was shown, in which the poster suggested that entry-level ID jobs don't actually exist. Now I laughed, but I'm inclined to agree, simply because, in my opinion, instructional designer, or its various synonyms, doesn't make for a great entry-level position in most organisations. In my experience, great instructional designers come from other related roles, such as trainer, L&D partner, or L&D admin, not the same as LMS admin, though they've come from there too. The list of L&D job roles is nearly endless, but in all honesty, I don't see many people jump from wanting to break into the industry straight to instructional designer or similar role. Almost always there's some kind of in-between role that we never talk about. And I think it's these in-between roles that actually make all the difference. Now, when I decided to pursue a career in L&D, it was a long time until I got an official L&D title. I was a people manager in a retail sales position, and I observed my team were not being well served by the official L&D function. So, I strove to make up the gap through coaching. This naturally led to documentation, then creation of job aids, handouts, and eventually video guides. Suddenly, I was creating like L&D style materials, some effective and some not. So, I went about researching coaching, performance support, and eventually learning. From there, I started adapting what I learned to my workplace. I attended seminars and conferences in my spare time and annual leave. Through this, my interventions became more impactful, eventually being noticed by the organisation. Suddenly, I had some small acknowledgement and even a little budget. Boom! In came the technology and down went the effectiveness of my interventions. I had to readapt much of what I had learned to the digital delivery medium. This was one of the biggest lessons I learned. The memory of this period still acts as a check on me today. No matter how good you think you are, always remember it does not take much or a big change to kick you back to the start. That whole period of my career was tough. It was tiring, I was undervalued and underpaid, but the foundational understanding of learning I gained there set me up for my whole career. In hindsight, I can tell you, software updates come and go, trends pass us by, but a working understanding of learning theory will act as a solid foundation on which you can build a long and fulfilling career. From there, I secured a more formal position, delivered face-to-face training, then designed those face-to-face sessions, then digitised them, implemented and launched an LMS, and finally created entire face-to-face and digital interventions and programs. Through this process, I learned new approaches and techniques, as well as picked up tons of different technologies, from authoring tools to platforms, graphic design software and video editors. As I found a need, I figured it out. Once again, I attended courses, conferences, seminars, webinars. I stayed late, started early, networked, and tried, often with no success, to avoid office politics. Through all of this, my strength, the thing that gave me the edge in a lot of these situations, were roots in learning theory. I knew what I was talking about and I could prove it. I didn't feel or assume, or as the kids would say, I brought receipts, or more accurately, I brought references and proof of past success. This meant that when I said, no, I haven't used X software, and here's why that doesn't really matter, I remained credible. In the end, the only times in my career I've actually had the official job title of Instructional Designer was when I freelanced to that position. But in the vast majority of roles I've described, I was engaged in instructional design, though not called an instructional designer. From all of this comes my past few years in which I've been the head of learning design for a content vendor and grown my own L&D consultancy, Evolve Learning Design. Even now, yes, I can use a lot of software, but every bit of it has been learned on the fly, as needed and never as my primary focus. Okay, relax. Story time is now over. And let's be clear, I'm not saying that this is the way into L&D. There isn't one. Your way into L&D might be someone willing to take a chance. It might be a friend on the inside. It might be a long, slow climb like me. Whatever way you find in is the right way for you. But I would ask you to consider one thing. Do you just want your first L&D job? Or do you want to become a great L&D professional? If the first is true, then that's totally valid. Well done for being honest. This video may still be for you. Don't be disheartened, you've not done anything wrong in my opinion. But if the second is true, then I implore you not to start with the technology. It's got some pull, I'll give you that, and storyline is there in every damn job description, like it's the world's most important thing, with theory and best practice and learning related things much further down the page, if there at all. The thing is, learning storyline before you understand how to design effective learning experiences is like flying a packed jumbo jet on your first flying lesson, likely to end in disaster. The world has enough crappy, ineffective content, largely created with good intentions, but no idea what makes for effective training. Instead of starting with storyline or your authoring tool of choice, start by understanding the role of L&D in the corporate world. Then explore the wonderful world of learning theory. Don't worry though, you don't need to be a PhD, nor do you have to work your way through a million research papers. Look to those who have come before you. Look for names like Clark Quinn, Michael Allen, Ruth Colvin Clark, Richard Mayer, Robin Hoyle, Miriam Nealon, Paul Kirshner, Donald Clark, Guy Wallace and Will Thalheimer. This isn't an exhaustive list, but very much sets an excellent direction of travel. Trust me when I say this is not some academic, snobbish approach to the world. I attended some CIPD courses many moons ago, but other than that have no official qualifications, no degrees or letters after my name, nor am I an expert, but I do listen to them. Instructional designers don't need to become theorists themselves, but we do need to listen to those theorists and take their findings into account. The authors I listed before are some of the best for doing exactly this, communicating their or someone else's findings to the practical world of L&D. So, you understand the role of L&D, you've got learning theory down or at least have a working understanding, it's time for technology, right? Well, hold on just a moment. You'll spend much more of your time as an instructional designer with people than using tools. So, make sure you sharpen your communication skills, stakeholder management skills, facilitation, because yes, instructional designers facilitate sessions all the time. Whether that's with stakeholders, end users, or business leaders, facilitation will make you a better instructional designer. We actually discussed this earlier in the year on the Ideas podcast in terms of how facilitation will make you a better e-learning designer as well, but we won't recover that ground here. Next up, how about understanding interaction design, user experience and user interface basics? Now I do mean basics here. You don't need to become a pro, that's another whole career, but you should know the basics of interaction design. If you're going to be doing more of the visual design and visual layout, focus on that as well. Those skills will really help you out on the development side of things, but some basic understanding as an instructional designer will help the process move more smoothly as well. On that note, not all instructional designers develop content. In fact, I would argue that some of the best in the industry and most effective content comes from a split of these roles. That separation allows for each person to be a pro in one area rather than stretching across both. This is actually one of the first things I did when I built my own team. I asked my IDs to focus on learning design and the developers to focus on technical development and design. Natural curiosity does mean, of course, there is some overlap, but collaboration, rather than an all-in-one person, has always been more effective in my experience. That said, this may not be a realistic expectation in many organisations. So, my mantra has always been, know the tool well enough to get the job done. If you find yourself pulled more towards the technical side of things, consider focusing on development. We often talk about instructional design versus development like development is a lesser role and instructional designers are somehow gods compared to that. It's not true. Both sides of that equation are necessary for great content. If you want to do both, cool. If you want to do one of them, awesome. There's no hierarchy there, at least not in my mind. As for what tools you should learn first, look to the market. Storyline is by far the most widely used authoring tool today. However, the industry is moving. Look at every trend report and big ideas post, and you see likely these three things: mobile, responsive, and or adaptive now, and accessible. So that's kind of four things, but you get my point. That's a list of stuff Storyline does not do well. Have you wondered why none of the authoring tools being released today are slide-based? This is why. Now, I'm not saying that Storyline is done. Far from it, and I'm sure it will be around for a long time to come. Articulate have done a fantastic job of creating an easy-to-use tool, and I'm sure they're going to evolve as time goes by. But don't be persuaded that there's no value in looking elsewhere. Maybe you learn some Storyline, but don't become beholden to it. Technology changes, and your value should not be tied to a single piece of tech. If you want to look beyond Storyline right now, I would suggest checking out Evolve from Intelum, Gomo, Chameleon Creator, Adapt, H5P, and maybe even something like Pebble Pro. Show you have an idea of what the market is made up of beyond those kind of headline products. Now, my final point is on portfolios. If you're freelancing, yes, they are needed. Mine was a PDF with some write-ups and a link to some demos. With that, I secured solid work for 3 years without difficulty and founded my company. Even now, our website is not fancy. There are no capstone projects. And by the way, that term really confuses a lot of L&D hiring managers. We don't really care what your trainer called the project, just what it is and how it solved a real business problem. Focus on that, and if you want to call it something, call it the name of the intervention. Focus more on what L&D wants to see and less on what you've been sold. For internal jobs, write a great CV. I'm a sucker for one side of A4 plus a cover letter. If I'm interested, we'll talk. I would suggest not worrying so much about the portfolio and instead dedicating that time to developing skills and a strong knowledge of the L&D industry. Now, by this, I don't mean don't create good work samples. I just mean don't spend weeks creating a fancy website when, as I just said, my PDF, even today, secures work without difficulty. Side note, please don't wander off into talking about ADDIE in your CV. I see this all the time. If the thing you need me to know about you is that you follow the most foundational approach to learning design out there, then maybe you aren't ready to step up to this role. That's my immediate thought. Use your CV and cover letter to tell me why I need you in my business. not you and every other person who's Googled the key skills for instructional designers. Now, this has already been a really long video, so let's wrap things up. In short, learning storyline and a few keywords will sadly land you a job. But from there, who knows what happens. If you really want to set yourself up for success, slow down and build your foundation on theory. And if you're sat there thinking, oh, Tom thinks I've done something terrible because I started with storyline, don't. It's your career and I'm doing all of this from hindsight. It's easy from where I'm at. You're free to make whatever you want of your career and go about things however you want to go about them. The good news is that if you want to start going back and building that solid foundation that I've been talking about, there are 1,000,001 resources to help you and they won't cost a penny. Many of the names I mentioned earlier share huge amounts of free content in blogs and on social media. My advice, listen to them. Ignore us YouTubers and everyday LinkedIn posters. We know infinitely less than real industry experts. And never be afraid to say, hey, I don't know anything about this. Can you help me out? Every time I've done that, and I do it at least once a week, it's paid off big time. Thanks for watching this video to the end. I know it was a little bit different. I hope there was something of use for you though. Let me know down in the comments how you got started in the world of L&D and if you'd do anything different if you started again today. And if you are just getting started, please do reach out and let me know what I can do to help.